of time, I'll try to keep it very, very brief. And we'll just quickly go through this background presentation on home working in India. And briefly, we'll also talk about the impact of COVID-19 on home workers and other informal sector workers. So the objective of this presentation is to share some findings of this small scale in-depth research that Tradecraft conducted in southwest Delhi in Kapasera, which is a colony, a residential colony of migrant workers who may be associated with with the industry, with the RMG, ready-made garment industry in Udyog Bihar, which is widely known to be export oriented. So to begin, we'll talk about this report by HomeNet South Asia, which is one of our partners in a EU-funded project called the Hidden Home Workers. We will talk about that project in a bit, but this report, which was developed as part of this project came up talks about how many home workers exist in the non-agricultural sectors in India, and it is estimated the number is around 12.48 millions. And of this, the manufacturing sector has the highest concentration of women home workers, which includes textile and apparel sector as well, 11% and 16% respectively. Now, home workers, who are home workers? For those who might not be as familiar with the concept of home working, they're a type of home-based workers who are subcontracted. Um, by contractors or subcontractors or other agents to produce or add value to goods in their own homes. I mean, sometimes they also work, collectively from a neighbor's house. I mean, but they're still home workers. So the intermediaries provide them with orders. Sometimes they also give them raw materials, and definitely they give them deadlines, and based on which they deliver goods, and they're paid on a piece rate basis. I mean, subcontractors, I mean, home workers, they're subcontracted workers, but they also have to sometimes cover many of the non-wage costs of production, which is workplace, equipment, utilities, and transportation, getting the garments from the contractors and then sometimes delivering them back too. And also the production risks. Sometimes they don't get paid if the orders are cancelled, if payments are delayed on top of the supply chain, if the goods are rejected, etc. So they also have to own these risks and some of these production costs. This study in which approximately 1,000 workers participated from India and Nepal also revealed, and Delhi was one of the focus geographies for this report. It revealed that 61% of home workers in Delhi believed that they produced goods for the international market, while the other 38% reported that they did not know. Tirupur was the second focus geography in India, and 150 labels of products on which home workers were found to be working were reviewed, and it was found that 32 of those logos belong to international brands. Home workers generally do not know exactly which brands they're working for. They may have an idea whether it's for the international market or not, but they don't generally know which brands they're working for, what are their rights as employees, and and what are the scope of the responsibilities of their employers. So they don't generally know that, which has serious repercussions on their collective bargaining process. Home workers tend to not really have any written contracts with the contractors they work for. They may keep a record, but it's not always really written down. Now, I mean, all of this, it helps us establish, and those of us who've been familiar with the concept of home working know that home workers have very little, it's very negligible labor or social protection, and they have very little opportunity to collectivize and raise collective voice and demand for their rights against exploitation. But we also need to understand that this is, I mean, however low the wages are, it's still an important source of income for women who cannot go and work in the factory for whatever reasons. We'll talk about that later in this presentation. So moving on to our research that we conducted in Southwest Delhi in this area called Kapasera, we tried to build on our existing knowledge, which is a study that we did in 2019 to identify forced labor risk among sector workers. Yes, Lakshmi. I'm sorry, was
No, nothing from my side. Did I
okay.
press a wrong button? But no, go
No,
on,
oh,
go
no,
on.
it's okay. It's all right. So yeah, so this study it tried to identify forced labor risk among garment sector workers at different tiers of supply chain, and home workers were a part of the study. We also tried to draw from our existing programmatic knowledge. An ongoing project that I talked about earlier, and the report I was quoting earlier was a part of this project. It's called the Hidden Home Workers. It's co-funded by the European Union, and on this project, Tradecraft Exchange is working in partnership with home workers worldwide who are present here today, and HomeNet South Asia, and other partners, including Seva Bharat, who are also present here in the session today. This project aims to improve transparency, supply chain transparency, and working conditions of home workers in supply chains across India, Nepal, and Pakistan. We've also worked in collaboration with local partners in our target area, like local CSOs, like Community for Social Change and Development, and I'm joined by our colleague Elizabeth from CSCD. Anyway, to continue with the research method, we conducted this research in two phases. Phase one was to understand the vulnerabilities of home workers from a human rights lens, and scope out whether or not there was some a possibility of engaging. In this geography with the tech assisted support to assist these workers and try to improve their working conditions. So we studied the nature of their work, their working conditions, their levels of indebtedness, what social entitlements they could access, what identity documents they had, what was their level of exposure and engagement with internet and other technologies. We also tried to understand how the supply chain really functioned, and what were the different layers in the supply chain, and we figured there's like multiple layers to the supply chain in which home workers are involved. And during the second phase of this research, we tried getting feedback of workers on the emergent tech-assisted design, about which our colleague from Incudius will be talking later during this webinar. The challenge was obviously doing this research in the context of the pandemic. We started this research before the pandemic, and since the pandemic, we've been engaging with home workers on for this research. And we had to adapt, and we did some remote interviews. We consulted some proxies who could speak on behalf of home workers and had their best interest in their mind. For example, some CSOs, and obviously, we kept all COVID safety protocols in mind. Now, moving on to the research insights, home workers, women largely, they choose to work from home. It's their own choice because they do not have alternative livelihood opportunities, because they have family responsibilities. They're largely married women with children, and social norms and gender norms dictate that these women, their primary responsibility is taking care of their children. So they cannot really go out and do a full-time work in factories. Home working allows them to have greater control of their working hours and when they can work, when they cannot. Anyway, home workers are generally reliant on receiving work from contractors and subcontractors. Now, these contractors and subcontractors, we are talking about different types of contractors and subcontractors. We'll talk about them later. And sometimes home workers pick up garments from home workers, or sometimes these garments are dropped off and picked up by the contractor. These workers are paid on a piece rate basis. And these pay levels are typically below minimum wage. When we were engaging with these workers, we found out typically for finishing and thread cutting work, these workers would be paid 25 paisa per piece, which is quarter of an Indian rupee, which is very low. And they would end up making 20 rupees or 30 rupees in a day, which is definitely, it's way below the minimum wage. Anyway, all these payments are in cash, and home workers prefer to get paid in cash because they believe that they can retain more control of their earnings if they got paid in cash. But it's also because of a lack of financial literacy and lack of trust in financial institutions among home workers. So those are other reasons, but largely because they want to gain greater control of their earnings by getting paid in cash. Home workers, as we discussed, they're paid very low, so they often have to rely on informal loans that they get from their friends and families to make ends meet. Sometimes they have to buy groceries on credit from a local grocery store because they don't have enough money to pay them at that time. Home workers, what do they want? Obviously, they want better pay. They want their livelihood to be preserved. They want regular work, and they want to continue working from home. We did encounter some issues about concerning the regularity of payment. Home workers were concerned that they do not get paid regularly and on time. And few contractors that we could speak with, they said it's because sometimes they don't get paid on time, and if the home workers really insist, then they have to pay them out of their own pockets, and sometimes contractors have to take loans to pay the home workers. And the amount of work that the home workers get, it's not always uniform. It depends. The work may be irregular, the workflow is not constant, and therefore the income can be variable too. And the COVID-19 pandemic has also reduced the amount of work which is available to home workers, and the piece rates have reduced as well. Home workers are often not recognized as workers, and they do not have any labor rights. It's difficult for them to even access home workers in supply chains because they're so invisible. So they're invisible. They're not. It's difficult to even access them. Informal workers generally don't know who they're working for, as we've discussed earlier, and in case they are not paid by the contractor, or their payment is delayed, or they have any other work-related grievance, they do not know who they can approach with these complaints. Um, I mean, since one of the objectives of this research exercise was to understand the scope of a tech-assisted system to support these workers, we tried to understand whether or not they have access to a smartphone. A small number of home workers did, but that was not necessarily their own phone. It could be through a family member. And now, because of COVID, their children are attending online classes. So a lot of them had recently bought a smartphone, but mostly they had a basic mobile phone, a feature phone. And we found very low levels of digital and financial literacy. They tend to keep a record of the work that they're doing and how much money is owed to them, but it is not always written down. About contractors and subcontractors, well, I mean, they exist at different tiers of supply chain. There are some bigger contractors who deal directly with the suppliers or the factories, and then there are smaller community-based subcontractors who engage with the home workers. Contractors, obviously, they take a margin for the work that is completed, and since there are multiple intermediaries, they each take a margin. Where there are home-based workers, contractors engage with them directly and generally tend to have a relationship with them. They organize a delivery also, and sometimes they collect the garments as well. They also check the quality, they keep a record of work, they perform a wide range of activities. There are female contractors as well, and since this is largely a male dominated profession, they tend to experience issues like harassment and sexual harassment. And in some cases, few home workers have also told us that the male contractors could be very demanding in terms of deadlines, and very aggressive towards them. So we did find that small sample of workers. Now, what is the contribution that
So,
home?
Kritika, in the interest of
Sorry, one.
time, yeah, if you can just
Yes, I'll just
shorten this
be.
in the interest of time. And
Yes, this is
yes,
just the second last slide, Lakshmi, and then we'll be wrapping up. So,
thanks.
as David has also mentioned, hesitation. Home workers are very important in supply chains, and I'll just talk from their perspective. And as David mentioned, gender of marriages, and they cannot really always go out and work in factories. And even if the wages are low, it gives them the flexibility to manage their responsibilities. And and we did speak to a lot of women, and they did mention that they want to continue working from home, and they would rather work from homes and go to factories even if they get paid more. There's also this very interesting research by the Center of Child Rights and Business. They did this in collaboration with Save the Children, and they found that homeworking, if it is positively and visibly integrated into supply chains, could have some very positive impacts on the children of home workers as well. And now, if Elizabeth is present, I'd like to quickly invite her to share some points on how COVID-19 has affected home workers, and then we wrap this presentation up. Elizabeth, are you there?